Amazing. So I thought what would be a really good starting place is hearing from you guys first. So, I mean, you can say them out or you can type them in the chat box, but what supplements have you guys used in the past, are currently using, have considered using moving forward? Let's get a nice roundtable going. As many ideas as possible.
TRT.
That's not a supplement, that's a necessity. It's a it's an absolute in everyone's program. Multivit, nice. Everything, just taking everything. Creatine, cool. Sleep support. Can you be more specific, Jay? Which one? Oh, it's gone. Ah, it's back. Oh,
yeah. This one.
oh my man. Strum. Cool. What is that it? Just the 3 supplements then? Not aware of any others.
The only ones I've tried with them.
Dan, what do you say? What do you use?
I don't actually supplement with anything. The only thing I was going to say was creatine, because that's one that's been on my radar for a bit, but always been a little bit. I was doing ashwagandha for a while, vitamin D at the moment, and magnesium for sleep. That's kind of the only ones that I really supplement with.
Okay, that's cool. That's not a bad thing. EAAs, pre-workout. Again, one that I expected to come up almost immediately, actually. Omega-3 and 6. Nice. Cool. Interesting that like the movement or the bias is towards like a lot of health-based subs, which is quite cool. Like obviously there are some performance ones there, but you know, for the most part, sleep support, creatine, Vit D, omega-3 and 6, multivit.
Does caffeine count?
Kind of ashwagandha. Caffeine, yeah, we could definitely put that in the same category as pre-workout as well, but maybe even, you know, as an appetite suppressant, it can be used as its own thing, for sure. You know, there are some like other honorable mentions, ones that we don't really ever prescribe, but are known to be used within especially the physique-based space. So you've got, just try and rub something out. You've got nicotine, could be used as a supplement. So you can get nicotine sprays that are used for appetite suppressant and cognition. You've got cognitive enhancers, so a lot of nootropics. Yeah, have any of you used a nootropic before?
No.
No, I never really knew what it was until a couple of weeks ago, but I always thought it just sounds scary, like the name of it. So I was like, oh, sounds like something serious. I touched it.
Terrible. It's even worse when you get a brand that's attached to a certain style, like fucking Redcon 1 as a brand is attached to like army style stuff. So I think their nootropic's called Mental Trigger. And it's just like, it starts to ostracize you away from that kind of idea, right? Like it's just, oh, let's call our supplement something that just makes no sense. Yeah, what else?
I think it's the phrase tropic made me think trippy. Like
That's it, man. That's it. Yeah. So NAC glutathione. We can kind of run around because I don't really have these in the talk, but I can definitely run through these. So nootropic is just for cognition. It's a cognitive enhancer. It has ingredients that have been shown to kind of improve cognition, but not to any great extent that would, you know, change your IQ, for example. The one thing it does do is it kind of enhances flow state work. So if you take a nootropic on its own with no plan of action, hoping that it will trigger you into working harder, it definitely won't. However, if you've got a list of tasks and you're really focused on doing those tasks, I can guarantee you'll probably do it better if you do take a nootropic. And they're just really low level. Some of them are like Ayurvedic medicines, so similar to ashwagandha. Some of them are a little bit more just increasing of like certain neurotransmitters in the brain already and stuff like that. So it's nothing like extreme. Some of them have stimulants as well. So like the really strong ones are they almost feel like pre-workouts. And that's, that's kind of then aligned with that nicotine as well, because obviously we know that that is a stimulant. So for example, if someone requires a stimulant, let's say they're like arse end of prep, they really require stimulants, but for whatever reason they can't be having caffeine at the moment or coffee, then nicotine is something that obviously you could explore as well. Because there is the association with smoking and nicotine, everyone just immediately thinks it's a terrible thing. But actually, if we look at it as a sole ingredient, when taken in the right circumstances, it just has a specific effect, right? NAC and glutathione, the reason I put those two together is because NAC is a precursor to glutathione. So NAC will actually be converted into glutathione through numerous processes, and glutathione is a massive anti-inflammatory. It's our biggest anti-inflammatory that we produce ourselves. You can actually supplement with glutathione itself, but it's fucking well expensive. Right? It's really expensive, so it's probably not worth it for most individuals. All right, but all of the stuff in yellow, all of the stuff that you guys have already mentioned is absolutely where we would start with these things. Amazing.
I don't know if you already mentioned it, because I just missed the start of that. But have you seen all those things are going around? I keep getting like pop-up ads of them. That Tonga Ali and what was the other one? That Fadoja something and I can't remember. The turkesterone. It's all
Yeah.
It's all what Andrew Huberman's like recommended.
Yeah. So Tonka Ali. So a lot of when we look at supplements, like you want a good research base. So like stuff from Huberman is quite cool because he'll introduce stuff in terms of like any research, but then to validate that research and not use it as a novelty to sound really smart, we can obviously follow companies like examine.com. Yeah, so I get all my research on supplements from examine.com, and they actually do have a small piece on Tonka Ali. It has been shown on a very, very low level to be, I believe, anti-inflammatory. But it's talked about in more recent research to have an influence on testosterone as like a testosterone booster. But I believe the research mostly is from people that already have low testosterone. So they might see a very small improvement if they have very low testosterone. But if testosterone is at a normal level, then I don't think there's really any change. But it's interesting you should mention it, because I was talking about that with Joe at the gym very recently. So, and I'd never heard of it before. So yeah, there you go.
It like literally like popped up. It's just like this new like testosterone booster there.
That's it, man. Like they just crop up, right?
Yeah.
What was the old one that always used
side
to,
effects.
what was the old one that everyone used to do? ZMA and Tribulus terrestris. That's what everyone used to take, thinking, fucking hell, like my testosterone is going to be through the roof, boy. And obviously nothing changes. So such is the nature of it. Amazing. Cool. So when we look at supplementation, what are we trying to look at? Well, one of the biggest problems, obviously, is that we create nutrient deficiencies when we're dieting. What you'll often see, especially in my coaching, but probably in your own as well, is your tendency to recommend supplementations comes in circumstances. It's not like right, everyone takes this or everyone takes that. And one of those biggest circumstances is dieting, because I think people forget that a deficit, literally a calorie deficit, if you think about the word, it is literally derived off the word deficiency, right? So we create these nutrient deficiencies when we create that deficit. It's just that the biggest deficiency we create is in calories and energy. But actually, obviously, that can transpire into other things. So that's a massive problem. We're going to create these nutrient deficiencies, especially as we're pulling out certain nutrients. And having an awareness of what nutrients we're pulling out is going to be vital if we want to look into any form of supplementation. Second big problem that we've got then is that we create nutrient deficiencies when we have low food variety. So this goes for any of you guys that are eating literally the same thing every single day, right? There are huge benefits to eating the same thing every single day. One being, if we think about decision fatigue, yeah, like if you've got an abundance of clients and programming to do in a day and your own training, and you need to determine what meals you're also eating, like to reduce that decision fatigue by having the same exact meals that you had yesterday, that's not a massive problem. It can work incredibly well. However, obviously, the longer that time stretches on, you build nutrient deficiencies just by the profiles of foods that you're eating. I actually talked about this on my story. Little plug for my Instagram there, even though you all follow me anyway. I talked about this on my story the other day, in that like one of my key considerations as I'm dieting is, what am I pulling out that maybe every few days I'll just pop back in, right? So I know my fats naturally sit quite low. So my choices of fats are pretty low anyway. All right. So for example, eggs I don't have in my diet at all. I choose dark chocolate. It's more palatable to me. My adherence is better for that. But every few days, I'll have a day where I pull my dark chocolate out and I put eggs in instead. Obviously, still managing the calories around that, because it's not exactly like for like. But that's going to be a way to facilitate an increase in healthy cholesterols, dietary cholesterols, and choline. Right, so that's just a really simple example of when we pull foods out and put them in, we're going to change what nutrients we're intaking. The big problem, is it the last? No, we've got one more, is that your lifestyle doesn't support an adequate sleep routine. So Jay mentioned sleep supplements or a sleep stack. Absolutely. But this is obviously now a lifestyle issue. So most of the clients that we deal with, or even ourselves, we might go through periods of time where it's not really an option. You know, it's not an option to get adequate sleep. If a lot of you guys are driving business forward, you'll understand that. You know, there are points where you have a really fucking shit sleep routine because you're doing very antisocial hours in the gym, or, you know, you're trying to deliver the best possible service, and thus you're not giving yourself great opportunity for lots of sleep. And whilst that's its own issue and should be addressed, it's kind of hard as a coach to turn around and say, you should be sleeping more, stop working on your business. Like, you need to make a living at the end of the day as well. So that's where you could potentially look at quality over quantity in terms of sleep. All right, so that would be for the individual that it might only be for 2 weeks, where it's like you check in, it's like, Jack, for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to have probably quite shit sleep because I'm focused in these other areas. It's like, all right, well, how can we improve the quality of that rather than the quantity? It's going to be through facilitating the transitional states of sleep as much as possible. It's going to be essentially taking you as fast into REM and deep sleep as we can. And that's going to come through the form of supplementation. And that's okay. That's fine. Last big problem is that your consistent stress and training volume is depleting your nutrients. We forget that when we train, we deplete certain nutrients. All right, when we sweat, we lose electrolytes. And then all we do, or all we seem to do, is drink water, right? Well, you know, that's probably not going to replenish a lot of those nutrients that we need in terms of minerals. You salt your food, that's great. How potassium rich is your diet? Because if you're not fond of bananas and potatoes, then you're probably quite low on your potassium. Right? If you're not fond of dairy products, then you might be lower on your calcium. If you're not fond of dark chocolate and oily fish, then you might be low on your magnesium. Yeah. So understandably, then these are going to be depleted, especially through sweat, but also magnesium is heavily, heavily depleted when we're stressed. Right? It's actually really depleted when we're training as well. But add those two together and you probably got, I would say, magnesium as a mineral is the most deficient mineral people have, alongside vitamin D being the most common vitamin that people are deficient in. So magnesium is going to be a big one that we're looking at. All right. Actually, no one said it here. Yeah, but magnesium. I would write potassium, but you can't actually supplement potassium. The really interesting fact about potassium, you can't get an over-the-counter potassium supplement. If you look for potassium anywhere, it'll come in the form of potassium chloride salt, so low salt, or it'll come in the form of coconut water or something as an extract inside, like an electrolyte. So if you look at potassium-rich electrolytes, it's coconut water as an ingredient, and that's high in potassium. The reason you can't get potassium over the shelf is because it can drop your blood pressure very fucking quickly, right? So if you buy it over the shelf, you could actually do yourself some massive damage. It's quite interesting. Right. So like we talked about, supplements do have value, but they are a temporary solution. Regardless of what beliefs are thrown around, you know, we all have our own belief systems around supplements, but we can all agree that they're not a lifetime solution. They're a temporary solution. What would be a lifetime solution is moving away, all right? They are a crutch, but remember, a crutch is used to overcome a friction or a barrier, right? It's used to support, but eventually that person needs to learn to walk on their own. Eventually that person needs to live without these supplements, all right? So those lifetime solutions are going to be introducing food, lifestyle, volume of training that they can tolerate. We're thinking about tolerance. These are all aspects that are going to get that person off supplements longer term. All right. We can either help educate them around it, but more often than not, it's going to be just through trial and error, because, you know, half of our clients don't really want to learn this shit. Like, they just want to be told what to do, and that's okay too. You know, the education might come later. Okay. Cool. So let's go on to some recommendations then. Like I mentioned, magnesium is probably the first one. We say magnesium glycinate. The reason we say glycinate is you can get magnesium oxides and citrates. All right. Magnesium oxides you'll see more commonly in like salts, so like bath salts and stuff like that. But it also has the same effect or a similar effect to citrates, which is that it has an influence on osmosis in the gut. All right, so it has something called osmolarity properties, and it will pull water into the gut, right? So into the gut. What happens if water's pulled into the gut? Does anyone know? Give it your best guess.
Bloated.
Diarrhea.
Absolutely, yeah. Loose stools, watery stools, diarrhea. Yeah. So is there any circumstance where something like a citrate might actually be useful for a client? Do we think?
Whether maybe, yeah, low motility.
Yeah, 1000%. Right. So if we're seeing the opposite, so if there is very little water in the gut, if they're struggling with constipation, then actually something like a magnesium citrate might be great for them. All right, but it's really hard to get the dosages right. All right, so for the most part, we're going to use something like a glycinate. Second reason is that magnesium glycinate is a very useful sleep supplement because it is a nervous system relaxant, right? So if the nervous system obviously downregulates, then we sleep better, which is great, right? If we don't take a glycinate, that person's going to wake up in the middle of the night and need the toilet, right? Which is not ideal. Okay, so we're going to use something like a glycinate. All right, the ranges can actually expand quite greatly. People can go anywhere from like 100 milligrams to like 500 milligrams. All right, and it depends on the tolerance of the person. So Jay's just checking his, and it'll say that it's about 500 milligrams, I think.
500, yeah.
Yeah. But the reason for that is we need to consider one other thing that me and Daryl have talked about before, which is the elemental value, right? This is the biggest quality assurance that you're going to find in a supplement company, right? The elemental value is the bioavailability of that supplement. So essentially how much you're going to actually use from that supplement, right? we use a company called NutriAdvanced. So this company here, the reason we use them is because their bio value, their elemental value of their 100 milligram magnesium is 50 mgs. Right, so literally 50% of the magnesium that they provide is actually highly absorbable, and that is considered good, right? So if you're just telling a client, oh, just buy a magnesium glycinate, and you're not recommending brands, they can actually end up buying very like shit stuff that doesn't really work very well. All right, this is why so much like off the counter, out of the counter stuff is just useless, because supplement companies are very clever in delivering the name, but not delivering the solution. All right, so that's our first one. We've got magnesium glycinate. We're going to use a company like NutriAdvanced or Thorne, are also a good brand. Thorne or NutriAdvanced. Thorne are very expensive, and they're usually used in like Australia and stuff. So we use Nutri instead. If you've got it in a stack, so like a patented formula like Strom's Sleep Neuromax, then that's fine. That's not a massive issue. A lot of companies will be honest about like their elemental values and stuff on their website. If they don't declare it, then it's kind of like one of those things of it's probably not worth risking taking the sleep stack and then also taking magnesium glycinate on top. It's just not worth that risk. It's not worth it. Cool. The second one we've got then is vitamin D. All right. So when we look at vitamin D, we've got a dosage of 2, for most people, 2 to 4,000 IUs. All right. This is a maintenance dose. This is not a dose to increase their stores of vitamin D. All right. Really, that's kind of unfair. If it's sunny and they're getting outside a lot, they might increase their stores of vitamin D. Right. In British weather, everyone's UK based here. So in British weather, that's going to be a maintenance dose for most people. All right, to get sufficient vitamin D. If someone's very, very low on vitamin D, so hypothetically you've got a blood test, or they're presenting all the compounding factors that we would expect of symptoms of low vitamin D, they're darker skinned, they have very low energy, poor training performance, all of that stuff, then you might have to dose higher temporarily to increase, right? So this is where you'll get the individuals. My wife's, my stepmom, my mother-in-law, my wife's mum, my mother-in-law, she gets dosed 50,000 IUs every month, right? Because she didn't get out of the house. It's fucking crazy. What do you say, Dan?
So no shit. Sorry, that's came out.
Oh shit. Yeah. So, but obviously 50,000 what? 50,000 over 3 days. 50,000 over 30 days isn't actually that much anymore, right? It's 5,000 divided by 3. So it's not actually crazy amounts. And what she notices is when she takes 50,000, it's really interesting. When she takes 50,000, her energy does this, and then through the month, her energy does this, right? And then she takes her next dose and it goes back up, right? So really interestingly, when we're considering this, the daily dose is going to be more valuable in sustaining, like we said, in sustaining those levels. So we want that person to consistently feel good rather than feel good at the start of the month and then feel shit at the end of the month, right? So that's why we would do a daily dose instead. It's really important to note it is a fat-soluble vitamin. So if that person is in a diet and they're on very low fats, the absorption of this is going to be impaired. And also the retention of their vitamin D is going to be impaired because they have less fat stores, right? So if they have less fat stores, you're not going to be retaining as much of these fat-soluble vitamins. So actually the dose might actually go up depending on if the person now is very lean or not. Okay, so that would be another one of our considerations. Okay, cool. Massive benefits taking vitamin D. I think we all know them, but it's going to be immune health. It's going to be energy. You know, vitamin D, we know is synthesized from sunlight, but it's very different depending on the person and their melanin in their skin. So unless you're testing that regularly and you know that person individually, no research validates any high risks to take in 2 to 4,000 a day every single day. So I would get most people on that. Then we move to omega-3s. All right. The reason we look towards an omega-3 is really for this. It's for the EPA. Sorry, you can't see my pen on the slide. There we go. For the EPA, right? So EPA, DHA is the thing we're looking for in our omega-3 supplementation. All right, you get a lot of off-the-counter omega-3 supplements that have very, very low EPA, DHA, right? Which again, aren't particularly useful for us. So if we're looking for, because again, we know that the anti-inflammatory properties come from massive value in this EPA, like we're wanting something, this is a really strong dose, but something like Now Supplements, so Now Supplements NOW, they have quite high dosage of things, but they also have low doses. So it depends on where that person's at. But we know that there's huge, huge benefits in anti-inflammatory properties. We also know that it can have like additional benefits. I'm pretty sure it is, I forget the word, anti-hypertensive. Pretty sure there's like research to suggest that it's massively anti-hypertensive. So if you've got someone with high blood pressure, then they could potentially see benefits from taking it as well. All right, but we know that in reality, the majority of the population that we might recommend taking this are gonna just have a very low consumption of omega-3s, right? So if they're not consuming any oily fish, you know, they're not consuming many monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, maybe even saturated fats, if they're not consuming many of them, then they would probably benefit again from an omega-3. All right, if you've got someone on just naturally a low-fat diet, so I say naturally because it's not a diet, it's more of a dietary choice. So again, thinking of a really good example here. Yeah, naturally a very low fat diet. So we need to help these clients out by then recommending, and obviously because omega-3s are associated with fish oils, we would then have to find a vegan source of that. So really common ones are like algae suspended ones, so like algae and stuff like that. All right, but these clients are also going to benefit massively from that. So we're thinking demographic specific now, we're thinking circumstance specific. Then we move on to creatine. All right, the reason I put JPs on, because actually when I was shopping around, like it was one of the cheapest, which is really surprising. As a brand, you expect it to not be. But we know that creatine has, again, massive performance value. All right. This is not the kind of thing that you would take and notice a distinct difference from straight away. All right. Unless you were heavily depleted in your creatine stores anyway, but that's unlikely. Right. We know that creatine is rich in red meats. All right. So if someone naturally doesn't eat very much red meat, then we would potentially get them to take it. All right. Every cell in the body utilizes and turns over ATP. It's the reason why adenosine, for anyone that's studied sleep, it's the reason that adenosine is the byproduct that makes us tired. All right. Every single cell in the body synthesizes and utilizes ATP. All right. But when we utilize ATP, we break it down and we end up with ADP plus 1-phosphate molecule. Right. So what creatine does is creatine phosphate. That's the molecule. And what it does really cleverly is it donates its phosphate molecule to ADP to recreate ATP. So it increases your synthesis, that's a better word. It increases your synthesis of ATP, right? Which is why your rest periods are shorter, you feel more energetic, you're able to perform at a better level. All right, but like I said, this is going to be the difference between getting a rep or not getting a rep. Really, I would probably say for most people, it's going to be the difference between getting a rep and not getting a rep, right? So unless you're really skilled at knowing exactly why you didn't get that rep, you're not going to come out of that set and go, fuck, it's because I didn't take my creatine today, or I didn't take my creatine for the last week. Like, it's going to be so hard to visualize, but you've got to think, like, we know in terms of habit building and habit stacking, we know how important compounding factors are. we've got to see something like creatine as a compounding factor. Because if you miss a rep twice a week for a year, that's substantial difference now. That's substantial volume changes, right? So we've got to think of the compounding effect from that. All right. Again, because it's rich in red meat, we would definitely recommend it to vegan clients. And there has been a lot of research more recently, not in the performance sector, but in neurodegenerative diseases. So the role that creatine and ATP plays in neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and dementia. All right, so that's also pretty cool. So there are definite health benefits and cognitive benefits aside from the performance side of things. All right, but performance is probably where you guys are most attached and see the most value. So that's what we would look towards. Honorable mention, I mentioned this at the very start, is also known as NAC, N-acetylcysteine. All right, this is a precursor to glutathione. So we know that glutathione is your biggest anti-inflammatory in the body. It's very, very potent. It's your biggest antioxidant as well. So it's very, very good at reducing like free radical stress, so like physical manifestation of stress. If anyone's ever taken glutathione, like you notice like substantial differences when you increase demand on like detoxification pathways, so like liver detoxification. So I always make this joke that like if you drink, the best hangover cure you can take is glutathione, right? Because your demand now when you drink alcohol on liver detoxification is much higher, right? But like we said, like for most people, glutathione, you get something called liposomal glutathione. That's a supplement that we would normally take, but it's very expensive and it's not something we would take year round, right? So then NAC becomes very appropriate because NAC is a precursor to glutathione, which is great. So it's much cheaper. You're still going to get a lot of those benefits, but NAC also has numerous other pathways to other things, which is also very cool. It's antimicrobial. So again, if someone has, for example, massive like bacterial overgrowth in their gut, like you can see potential benefits from taking NAC as well. It's very, very cool as a supplement. Because we know that it supports physical reduction of physical manifestations of stress. If you know someone's going through an abundance of stress, whether it be physical or psychological, something like NAC might be massively helpful, right? So for myself, as I get closer to the end of my prep, my NAC consumption will go up, right? As I get to the last 4 weeks of a 21-week diet, I'm probably going to take NAC daily because it would just make sense. My physical stress is going to be so high at that point that it would just make sense for me. Right, but there's a forecast in my head. There is a plan of action of why it would be appropriate. Yeah, that's what we're always thinking with these kind of supplements. Right, you can go anywhere from like, I mean, 600 is totally safe. You can go anywhere up to 2000. To give you an example, I had a client that did a photo shoot in April, at the end of April, and she has she has psoriatic arthritis, which is psoriasis in the joints. It's really fucked up. But she had this arthritis, basically psoriasis in her joints. We put her on 2000 milligrams of NAC for like the last week of her prep because we wanted to bring all physical stress down, wanted to bring inflammation down as low as possible. So we put her on 2000 milligrams for a week. We just, we'd just reduced it after a week. So you can go as high as this, but, we're looking short term. We're not looking long term. We've got another honorable mention, electrolytes. So like we said, if you're sweating quite a lot, especially through summer, your perspiration goes up, you're training very hard, it's leg day, all of that stuff. Your electrolytes are going to be fundamental. They're going to be an absolute necessity. They're going to be a requirement. Would it be useful for someone with arthritis, NAC? Yes, absolutely. I don't know if you missed me talk about the client that I had with arthritis, but I used it with her. Absolutely. It's not going to help with the arthritis. This is really important. It's going to help with the manifestation of inflammation that comes with arthritis. right? So we know that inflammation can be really beneficial in a lot of circumstances. Inflammation triggered by autoimmune responses is not always the same. So if we damage a soft tissue and our body inflames, it's to increase blood flow to that area. And that can be a really beneficial thing. It's the reason that the whole rice remedy was recorrected and people told people to stop icing things, is because it reduced inflammation, and actually you want the inflammation there. But with an autoimmune condition, it's not all, the inflammation is sometimes a symptom because your body is attacking itself, and that's not always a benefit. So with something like arthritis, the inflammation is not always useful to have. And especially if that client's prepping, you know, if you want them to present the least inflamed look as possible, then it would make sense to reduce their inflammation. So it just depends on the circumstances. It's not necessarily something I would have someone on year round though. There would be circumstances where I would push it more and less. So for electrolytes, we would look towards, again, a good electrolyte profile. You can get more potassium-rich ones, and you can get more sodium-rich ones. Most come with like a fair amount of magnesium, sometimes calcium, which is cool. All right. So this would be, again, highly relative to what the person is presenting, right? It's easy to think, oh, well, why would I not just go for a potassium-rich one? Because most people don't eat a lot of potassium, so it would make sense to go for that one, and I would totally agree. However, if someone's already got low blood pressure, if someone naturally just has low blood pressure and you're like, right, let's put this potassium-rich electrolyte in, you're going to have more of an influence on their blood pressure, right? So we might go with like a sodium-based one for someone with low blood pressure, and then potassium for someone with high blood pressure. You see how like each of these supplements becomes more nuanced now, right? We can still take into account the diet, of course, and we can take into account the symptoms that they're presenting. So if they're getting symptoms of like cramping, then we might put more of one supplement than the other. It just depends on kind of where they're at. But you know, there's too many other factors at play. But for most individuals, you'll see like that they have both potassium and sodium anyway. So that's not a problem. Maybe you know that the individual doesn't salt their food very much. Maybe they're naturally very anti-salt. So you put them on something like this because they don't understand that sodium is just salt. It's, you know, it's all relative. So that's a good honorable mention. And then J Raj's favorite, we've got Support Max Neuro, Sleep Stack. I use this as a good example because it's, when we say stack, we think of a conglomeration of ingredients, right? And a lot of sleep stacks have like a lot of different ingredients, right? So they're going to contain things like ashwagandha, they're going to contain like lion's mane, they're going to contain like L-theanine, they're going to contain magnesium, and then they might include some like Ayurvedic stuff as well, right? The big ones like L-theanine is very, very useful because it's something called anxiolytic, which I love the word. It sounds really cool, but it just means anti-anxiety. But it's anti-anxiety as a property. So if someone is predisposed to anxiety, then something like L-theanine is very valuable. However, you might also need some of these anyway, and thus it's more beneficial to just take in a stack of ingredients. So something like that can be really, really useful. Ashwagandha, we already know, is an adaptogen. So again, if someone's high, it will bring them down. If someone's low, it will bring them up, right? It is the cocaine of the supplement world, right? Adaptogens just level people out, right? And it's not potent. It's actually very like low level, but it can make a little bit of difference depending on the person. All right. L-theanine is also very, very useful if someone's on very high amounts of caffeine. So again, let's say that caffeine is very, very high for a person because they're prepping and they're using it for, you know, anti-hunger. They're using it as a stimulant rather than anything else, but they're starting to get these like anxiety kind of symptoms. Then we could take L-theanine to mitigate that, right? So L-theanine will block the receptors in, I believe, the glutamate pathway, and that will reduce the anxiety effects of caffeine. And just check the chat. Check the chat. Was it cortisol that it leveled out? Yeah, it's mostly cortisol. And it's not, it's not to the effects of like, okay, so in the morning when you wake up, your cortisol should spike, it should be high. Like your ashwagandha is not going to be potent enough to pull your cortisol down to like a low level. Like, it's not that harsh. But if you were to like grade it on like 1 to 100 of your cortisol, let's say that was your cortisol, your ashwagandha, depending on the sensitivity of the person and the dosage, could influence it by maybe like 15%, let's say. So they're still up here, like that's still pretty high, but it just stops them from being like here. So it can, and then use that in conjunction with other things that might also peak cortisol, like anxiety or stress or other things. If you reduce those as well, that's how you're going to get like down here, right? But again, remember, like cortisol is still a good thing in certain circumstances, like we need it for training. Dylan, is ashwagandha anxiolytic too? It's a really good question. I would imagine so, but only from it's not a direct effect, right? We know that the direct effects, let me clear some of this shit out. Right, so we know that L-theanine is anxiolytic because it blocks a glutamate pathway, right? So imagine that you've got these receptors, and these are your anxiety receptors, right? And caffeine is going to be going into each of these, and it makes you feel more anxious. What L-theanine will do is L-theanine will actually support the blocking of these receptors, right? And that makes it anxiolytic. It makes it anti-anxiety. Ashwagandha doesn't do that, right? So I can't say that directly it does. However, you would definitely get some indirect anti-anxiety benefits, for sure. For sure. It would just be through other circumstances, like we talked about with cortisol reducing and other things like that. So cool. Guys, that is the end of my presentation. I'm glad I got it done in time because I was worried that I'd end up talking over an hour. But do we have any thoughts on any of this? Do we have any ideas of like, oh, now that we've covered that, I might actually end up taking that out of my program or putting it in my program? Has anyone had any change of thoughts on any of the supplements they were originally considering? No?
Just that sleep stack thing.
Yeah.
Do you know any good ones of that? Any recommendations of that or anything?
Yes, so you've got two main ones that we would use. You got Strom, which is they have a product called Support Max Neuro PM.
Yeah.
Ironically, they do have one called Support Max Neuro, right? And that would be like a nootropic, right? So PM is obviously just adding those additional ingredients that are going to help you sleep. And then the other one is a supplement needs. I'm pretty sure theirs is literally called Sleep Stack. JP does have one as well. What's it called? I can't remember. It might be called Dream or something. It looks very, very similar to Dean's Sleep Stack that he created for supplement needs. But to be honest, personally, this is the only one I've ever used, so it's the only one that I recommend. Because until I've used it, I wouldn't feel comfortable recommending it. But I do know that a lot of people use this and see massive benefit. So it's just about like looking at the ingredients for you personally, knowing your personality type, knowing what you're predisposed to and going, all right, maybe that's better.
Yeah.
Because I'm saying all of this from an element of, I don't have huge spikes of anxiety. I don't have restless legs. Like I can drift off just fine. So if this works perfectly for me, it might not work perfectly for the person that doesn't drift off okay, or the person that wakes up in the middle of the night, for example. Yeah. One thing that's actually really important to mention, I guess, is because the magnesium's so high in this, and it has like ashwagandha, and it has what's the other ingredient? It has L-theanine, I know that, but I think it has one other. Is if you're taking some other supplements throughout the day without thinking, you can actually end up fucking like massively overdosing on these things.
Yeah.
Right. So because it has like 500 mgs of magnesium, milligrams, not grams, 500 milligrams of magnesium, and then you end up taking just magnesium rich foods through the day as well, your magnesium can end up being really fucking high, and it makes you feel quite groggy the next day. So if you do notice symptoms like that, it's a simple case of like, okay, maybe we half scoop it rather than full scoop it. Just like we would a pre-workout. Yeah. Cool. Brent, any other questions?
No.
No. Amazing.
Oh, what I was going to say actually, Jack, just as you mentioned pre-workout, was like, do you know how really, like, obviously depending on what time you go to sleep, but shouldn't be having caffeine, like let's say past 2 p.m. I mean, I don't take pre-workout anyway, but does that also mean a cut off time for pre-workout?
Yeah, of course.
Let's say you're going
Yeah, because so me and Dylan were actually having this conversation the other day. Like, because a lot of pre-workouts actually overshoot, they usually go anywhere like 250 to 350 milligrams.
yeah, it's mental.
It's fucking massive. It's like massive. Whereas most coffees are like 80 to 120 max. You know, so if we're saying, right, you've got a caffeine curfew of, 2 p.m. The reason we put that, why do we put 2 p.m., Jay? Why do we put 2 p.m. as the curfew?
Because of the half-life of caffeine.
Is how long?
8 hours?
Oof, generous.
5, isn't it?
6?
Yeah, 4 to 6.
6.
4 to 6, depending on the tolerance of the person.
Yeah.
Right. So because 4 to 6 hours, right? So if we literally do the maths on that, let's average it at 5. So 5 hours later, it's 7 p.m. Right. So let's say you had a strong coffee that was 120 milligrams. Right. If you take that forward, I need to be quicker on this bloody pen. So if you take that forward, that's still 60 milligrams at 7 p.m. because of the half-life, right? But then in between then, maybe you've also had a Diet Coke. Maybe you've also had some dark chocolate. These things that are actually like, they still have some caffeine in.
Yeah.
Then you've bolstered that up. Maybe now it's, I don't know, 90. So it's 90 milligrams, which is a small coffee. So you've got a small coffee in your system at 7 p.m.
Yeah.
Right. And that's on low dosage. Now take that with a pre-workout, right? So let's say you have a 350 pre-workout at 1 p.m. 5 hours later at 6 p.m. You've still got quick maths. Who's got it?
175.
Or I'll probably put them together. Oh, no, still got
175.
dog shit maths.
Brilliant. The next week's call is going to be a maths call, by the way. Absolutely. Right, 175 milligrams, right, which is like 2 coffees. Yeah. So you got 2 coffees in your system at 6 p.m. Remember, it's half-life. So the really interesting thing about half-life is you keep halving it every 5 hours. So if we go to 11 p.m., we just do half of 175.
Yeah.
Right. So now we've got 87.5 milligrams at 11 p.m. And that person sat there like, I need to go to bed. I need to sleep. Right. And that's at 1 p.m. You've had a strong pre-workout at 1 p.m. That's not even that late. Right. So the concept is, yeah, absolutely. It would be a sliding scale of curfew based upon what the individuals actually consumed. So for me, this is a really good topic. So for me, my training right now is dog shit unless I have caffeine, because like I'm arse end of a prep, like it's not going well. So if I train with caffeine, I need to be training way before 12, because I'm very aware that I also have dark chocolate in the afternoon. I also have a Diet Coke, because these are things that keep me adherent longer term to my deficit. So if I'm always bolstering my caffeine, then in reality, I need to manage that thing. So how am I going to navigate that, Jay? What stuff can I kind of go to aside from just moving my caffeine earlier, moving my training earlier? What else can I do?
Could you have a sleep?
Have what?
Like a sleep supplement.
I could have a sleep supplement, yeah, for sure.
Is it L-theanine in particular? But obviously, I know you'd have it in the stack.
Yeah, potentially, just reducing some of the stimulant effects. What else? What is this? What do we associate this with? We just naturally associate this with caffeine. But what else could I have?
Could have a non-stim pre.
I could have a non-stim pre, so I could have a pump. I could have a pump formula maybe plus a coffee, which I know isn't as high. Yeah. You see how that would change. So I'm still having, let's say, the placebo or the trigger, the mental trigger that comes with taking a pre-workout, but I'm having literally a third of the caffeine. Right. And then everything can slide forward. So if I know that, for example, rather than getting to train at 9 a.m., I'm training at 11 or 12, I'll try to avoid any potent pre-workouts.
What's a non-stimulant pre? I've never even heard of a non-stimulant pre, to be fair.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
No shit. Mad. So you've got some cool things. So not in all of them, but you usually have something like beta-alanine, citrulline, sodium. Sometimes there's like a focus thing as well. So it might be like what you'd get in like a nootropic. So like alpha GPC, which is just a nootropic. It's like a cognitive enhancer, but it's not a stimulant. And then you might have something like sodium or whatever. Right. So it's literally a lot of things that are going to open up your blood vessels. So rather than your vasodilation like being that size, it would literally just change a little bit to that size. And that increase in blood flow would increase your pumps and stuff like that. Right. It's fucking like it's marginal. It's literally marginal. But I think the best thing to come out of it is the fact that it's now a non-stim. I think that's a phenomenal thing, because I think people abuse caffeine.
That's what I use if I ever use one.
For sure.
I don't really try not to have a lot of caffeine. It's not really. I'll get a proper buzz if I have the caffeine ones. So yeah, I'll go for that one instead.
Literally, and it's just another consideration. It's just another tool. Like me and Dylan were talking about it when we were talking about like the use of caffeinated supplements and potential options of pump supplements and stuff like that instead. Like it's just being willing to kind of move and adapt based on what your needs are, and stuff like that. But
I've got one here literally with me that I'm thinking of buying, which is the Naughty Boy one, 6 pump. It's not got any caffeine in it, but just for an idea, to read out some stuff I've got in it.
Yeah.
Does that help or not?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. It's got L-citrulline, betaine nitrate, taurine, nitrosogene, AMLA, cetria, L-glutathione, estrogen, and niacin, pink Himalayan sea salt, and vitamin C.
Nice. Cool. Niacin's an interesting one. Has anyone ever had a niacin flush before?
No.
That's crazy. It's basically just where you consume way too much niacin, like you're usually in a pre-workout form like that or something, and your skin just goes bright red. Like it's not quite rashy, but it's like you just come out in like this really bright red, like literally almost like the color on my vest. It's fucking mental. So if that ever does happen to you, by the way, that's probably just a niacin flush. But yeah, they're literally just like small ingredients that compound into this like change in you know, blood vessel size, all of that stuff. So nothing too fancy, but they, you know, it's just another tool. So yeah, like hopefully there's some stuff here that you can take forward with your clients or yourselves in your journey. Like I am a prescriber of supplements, like I do put it in plans occasionally. So it's nice to have the foundations of this call to validate like why I might be putting something in. It's very rare I would put anything in that's not been in today's call. So if I ever do, call me out on it and say, why the fuck have you put that in? Because, you know, I'm sure there's probably a reason. And there's obviously stuff that we've probably not mentioned that is very valid to specific demographics. You know, that always goes without saying. So I don't know, maybe like psyllium husk for clients that have certain digestive requirements, or, you know, just random shit like that. Maltodextrin, cyclic dextrin, you know, carb powders, like all of that stuff, amino acids, they would still be usable, but they're much more in specific demographics now. Don't really use EAAs unless it's a vegan client. I don't really use like carb powders unless the client is on very high calories and like appetite is a challenge. And obviously we facilitate those things as well. Cool. All right, boys, I realize that I've mostly just talked for this hour. So if there is anything that any of you guys wanted to